They told you it was love. You believed them. They convinced you that jealousy was passion, that control was care, that walking on eggshells was devotion. You accepted the script. They handed you the one that turned you into the perfect victim. And while you bled in silence, calling it sacrifice, they perfected the art of psychological warfare that Machiavelli documented 5 centuries ago. But here's what they never told you. This isn't your fault. This isn't even about individual pathology. This is systematic programming, designed over millennia to create a population that confuses abuse with affection, control with love, and trauma bonds with deep connection. Machiavelli saw it happening in the Italian Renaissance, the church weaponizing guilt and shame to control entire populations, noble families using emotional manipulation to maintain dynastic power. He wrote about it in passages that were later suppressed, burned, hidden from public view because they revealed too much about how power actually operates, not through armies and gold, but through the careful cultivation of emotional dependency. The Vatican knew these writings were dangerous, not because they promoted evil, but because they exposed it. They showed how institutions deliberately break healthy relationship models to create compliant, controllable populations. They revealed the truth that those in power have always known. A person who understands healthy love cannot be enslaved. A person who recognizes manipulation cannot be controlled. So they buried Machiavelli's real insights about human relationships and gave you sanitized versions about political strategy. They kept the dangerous knowledge, the psychology of emotional control, locked away in elite circles while feeding you fairy tales about love conquering all. Meanwhile, they built a civilization designed to traumatize you into accepting abuse as normal. Think about it. From childhood, you were conditioned to believe that love requires sacrifice, that a good person absorbs punishment for the sake of peace, that setting boundaries is selfish, that walking away from someone who hurts you is abandonment. Every movie, every song, every story reinforced the same toxic mythology. True love means staying, no matter how much it destroys you. They programmed you to become the perfect target, and then they introduced you to people who had been programmed as the perfect predators. People who learned, through their own childhood trauma, that love is possession, that care is control, that intimacy means having unlimited access to someone's pain points. People who inherited patterns of abuse, going back generations, and mistake their compulsions for affection. The abused become abusers, not through choice, but through psychological programming so deep it operates below conscious awareness. The child who watches their father control their mother through emotional manipulation learns that this is how power works in intimate relationships. The woman who experiences sexual violence learns to use sexual withholding as a weapon of control. The man who grows up in emotional chaos learns to create chaos as a way of feeling powerful. Generation after generation, trauma gets passed down like genetic code, creating populations that are simultaneously victims and perpetrators, oppressed and oppressive, wounded and wounding. But here's where it gets truly sinister. The same people who are most damaged by this system, the ones most trapped in cycles of emotional abuse and sexual frustration, become the most fervent supporters of political oppression. They elect leaders who promise to control others the way they've learned to control or be controlled in their personal relationships. Look at the global political landscape right now. Look at the leaders rising to power across the world. Authoritarians who promise simple solutions to complex problems. Strongmen who offer to dominate enemies while protecting their followers. Political figures who present themselves as both all-powerful protectors and perpetual victims of persecution. Sound familiar? It should. It's the exact same psychological profile as an abusive romantic partner. They follow a predictable and devastating playbook. A 3-stage strategy of emotional conquest designed to create a trauma bond. The love bombing phase, where they promise to solve all your problems, to be everything you've ever needed, to protect you from a dangerous world. The isolation phase, where they convince you that everyone else is lying to you, that only they can be trusted, that questioning them is betrayal. The punishment phase, where they rage against enemies, real and imagined, while demanding absolute loyalty from their supporters. And just like in abusive relationships, their followers become addicted to the chaos. They interpret the leader's instability as strength, their cruelty as protection, their lies as hidden truths that only the initiated can understand. They defend behavior they would never accept in their personal lives, because they've been conditioned to mistake abuse for love, control for care, and manipulation for leadership. This isn't coincidence. This is the inevitable result of a population that has been systematically trained to accept toxic relationship dynamics as normal. If this is hitting too close to home, if you're starting to recognize patterns you've been blind to, not just in your personal relationships, but in your political choices, your family dynamics, your entire worldview, then subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because what I'm about to reveal gets much darker, and YouTube doesn't want you to see the rest. The algorithm suppresses content that teaches people to recognize emotional manipulation on both personal and political levels. Share this video now, before they bury it completely. Machiavelli understood something that modern psychologists are only beginning to acknowledge. Personal trauma and political oppression are not separate phenomena. They are interconnected systems that feed off each other, creating cycles of abuse that span generations and entire civilizations. The sexually frustrated man who can't form healthy relationships with women becomes the perfect recruit for movements that promise to control women's behavior. The emotionally abused woman who learned that love means accepting punishment becomes the perfect supporter of leaders who promise to punish their enemies. The child who grew up in chaos learns to create chaos as an adult, both in their personal relationships and in their political choices. This is why authoritarians always target sexual freedom and relationship autonomy. It's not about morality, it's about control. Sexually satisfied, emotionally healthy people are much harder to manipulate. They don't need a political leader to validate their worth or promise them power over others. They don't mistake cruelty for strength or confuse domination with protection. But sexually frustrated, emotionally wounded people will support almost any leader who promises to give them control over the sources of their pain. They will vote for policies that restrict others' freedoms. If those policies offer the illusion of order in their chaotic inner worlds, they will defend leaders who abuse power because they've been conditioned to see abuse as evidence of strength. And the leaders themselves, they're often the most damaged of all. People are so wounded by their own experiences of powerlessness that they become addicted to dominating others. Leaders who learned in childhood that love and fear are the same thing, that being needed and being feared are equivalent, that causing pain is the surest way to feel powerful. This is the brutal cycle that Machiavelli observed in his time, and that we're witnessing again today. Traumatized populations electing traumatizing leaders who create more trauma, which creates more traumatized people who elect more traumatizing leaders. And at the center of it all, the destruction of healthy intimacy, the deliberate sabotage of people's ability to form secure, loving, respectful relationships. Because they know the people who really understand power, who study these patterns across centuries and cultures, they know that a population capable of healthy love is a population incapable of accepting oppression. People who know what real intimacy feels like cannot be convinced that surveillance is safety. People who understand what respectful partnership looks like cannot be manipulated into supporting authoritarian control. This is why they work so hard to destroy your ability to recognize healthy relationships. Why they flood the culture with examples of toxic dynamics disguised as romance. Why they promote relationship models that create trauma bonds instead of genuine connections. They need you confused about love, so you'll be confused about power. They need you accepting abuse in your personal life, so you'll accept tyranny in your political life. They need you traumatized and sexually frustrated, so you'll support leaders who promise to traumatize and sexually frustrate others. It's a system of mutual destruction disguised as civilization, and it starts with that lie they told you about love. The lie that real love involves sacrifice, suffering, and the willingness to accept punishment for the sake of peace. Have you ever heard people say, where there's no jealousy, there's no love? This is perhaps the most dangerous lie ever created about human relationships. Jealousy is not love. Jealousy is fear, dressed up as passion. It's the desperate clinging of someone who doesn't understand their own worth, who can't trust because they don't believe they're worthy of loyalty, who needs to control their partner because they can't control their own insecurity. Real love is spacious. It trusts without surveilling. It loves without possessing. It encourages growth without fearing abandonment. Real love doesn't need to monitor your communications, isolate you from friends, or punish you for having interests outside the relationship. But they've convinced entire populations that this healthy love is somehow less passionate, less deep, less meaningful than the chaos of trauma bonds. They've taught you to interpret anxiety as excitement, to mistake someone's inability to function without you for devotion, to believe that a person who can't let you live your own life must love you more than someone who can. This programming doesn't just destroy your personal relationships, it destroys your ability to recognize healthy power dynamics anywhere. If you accept that love requires suffering, you'll accept that citizenship requires surrendering freedoms. If you believe that real care involves control, you'll support leaders who promise to control others for your protection. If you think that jealousy proves devotion, you'll vote for politicians who are jealous of other nations' prosperity and promise to diminish them to make you feel stronger. The connection between personal trauma and political oppression runs deeper than most people realize. The same psychological mechanisms that keep you trapped in an abusive relationship are the ones that keep entire populations trapped under authoritarian rule. The intermittent reinforcement that creates trauma bonds in personal relationships is the same mechanism authoritarians use to control populations. Periods of punishment followed by brief moments of relief or reward. creating an addiction to the leader's approval. The isolation tactics that abusive partners use to cut you off from support systems are the same. Strategies authoritarian governments use to destroy independent media, civil society organizations, and democratic institutions. The gaslighting that makes you question your own perception of reality in a toxic relationship is the same technique authoritarian leaders use to make their populations doubt objective truth. The way an abusive partner convinces you that their violence is your fault is the same way oppressive governments convince their citizens that their suffering is caused by external enemies rather than internal mismanagement. And just like in personal relationships, the population becomes addicted to the drama. They mistake the leader's instability for strength, their cruelty for protection, their lies for hidden truths. They defend behavior that is obviously destructive, because they've been conditioned to interpret chaos as evidence of passion and control as evidence of care. This is why healing your personal relationship patterns isn't just about your individual happiness. It's about breaking cycles of oppression that span generations and affect entire societies. When you learn to recognize emotional manipulation in your personal life, you become immune to political manipulation as well. When you understand what healthy boundaries look like in relationships, you can recognize when political leaders are violating democratic boundaries. When you refuse to accept abuse as love, you also refuse to accept tyranny as leadership. But this knowledge is dangerous to those in power. A population that understands healthy relationship dynamics cannot be controlled through political abuse. People who know what real intimacy feels like cannot be convinced that surveillance equals safety. Citizens who understand what respectful partnership looks like will not accept authoritarian domination disguised as protection. So they work tirelessly to keep you confused about love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. They promote media that romanticizes obsession, glorifies toxic jealousy, and presents control as caring. They create economic systems that force people into codependent relationships. They destroy community structures that once supported healthy bonding and replace them with digital platforms designed to create insecurity and comparison. They want you sexually frustrated, emotionally wounded, and relationally confused because that makes you politically controllable. The most rebellious thing you can do in this system is to learn what healthy love actually feels like. To refuse to accept jealousy as passion, control as care, or chaos as excitement. To build relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual need, on genuine affection rather than trauma bonds, on trust rather than surveillance. And this is where Machiavelli's suppressed teachings become revolutionary. He understood that personal sovereignty and political freedom are inseparable. You cannot be free in the world if you are enslaved in your relationships. You cannot resist political oppression if you accept emotional oppression as normal. His hidden writings about relationships weren't just about personal happiness. They were about political liberation. He knew that a person who could recognize and resist manipulation in their intimate life would also be capable of recognizing and resisting manipulation in their political life. This is why his relationship insights were more dangerous to the church and the ruling classes than his political strategies. Political power can be seized through force, but emotional power can only be maintained through consent. And people who understand healthy relationships will never consent to being emotionally controlled, whether by a romantic partner or a political leader. The techniques for escaping emotional manipulation that Machiavelli documented are the same techniques for resisting political oppression: strategic detachment, emotional unreachability, the ability to observe patterns without getting caught in drama, the wisdom to make decisions based on actions rather than promises. Most importantly, the understanding that some people and some political systems are fundamentally incapable of healthy relationships, and that trying to love them into wholeness will only destroy you. This applies whether you're dealing with an abusive romantic partner or an authoritarian political leader. The same psychology that keeps you trapped in toxic personal relationships keeps entire populations trapped under oppressive governments. The same strategies that free you from personal manipulation also free you from political control. But they don't want you to make this connection. They want you to think that personal relationships and political systems are separate domains, that what happens in your bedroom has nothing to do with what happens in the voting booth. They want you to believe that healing your personal trauma is selfish navel-gazing rather than revolutionary political action. The truth is exactly the opposite. Every person who learns to recognize and resist emotional manipulation becomes a threat to systems of political control. Every individual who builds healthy relationship patterns contributes to the creation of a healthy society. Every person who refuses to accept abuse as love also refuses to accept oppression as leadership. This is why they suppress this knowledge. Why they remove content that teaches people to recognize manipulation. Why they pathologize boundary setting and shame people for prioritizing their emotional health. They need you wounded, confused, and desperate for someone to take control of your chaos. They need you to believe that strong leadership looks like emotional abuse, that real love requires sacrificing your autonomy, that healthy boundaries are selfish, and that questioning authority is betrayal. Don't let them win. This information has been suppressed for centuries because it's dangerous to those who profit from your emotional and political confusion. Subscribe, share this video, and save it to your playlists. The algorithm is designed to bury conversations like this. They don't want you comparing notes about these patterns or making connections between personal trauma and political oppression. Your comment helps fight that suppression and pushes this video to more people who need to see it. Your freedom, and the freedom of everyone trapped in these cycles, depends on this knowledge spreading faster than they can suppress it. They want you to believe that healing your personal trauma is selfish navel-gazing. The forbidden truth is the exact opposite. The micro always becomes the macro. Learning what healthy love feels like, healing the wounds that make you accept abuse, and forging yourself into a sovereign individual is not just self-help. It is the single greatest and most potent contribution you can make to the liberation of society. The truth they don't want you to know is simple. You deserve love that doesn't hurt. You deserve relationships that don't require you to betray yourself. You deserve partnership that enhances your life instead of consuming it. And you deserve political leaders who serve rather than dominate, who protect rather than control, who earn your trust rather than demand your submission. But more than that, you have the power to break the cycles that create oppression at every level of society. Every healthy relationship you build, every boundary you maintain, every time you choose respect over chaos, you're contributing to the creation of a world where political oppression becomes impossible. Because people who know what healthy love feels like cannot be convinced to accept abuse as leadership. People who understand what respectful partnership looks like will not vote for politicians who treat them like property. People who have experienced genuine intimacy cannot be manipulated by leaders who offer trauma bonds disguised as patriotism. The personal is political. Your relationship patterns are part of larger systems of control. Your healing is a revolutionary act. Your refusal to accept abuse as love is also a refusal to accept tyranny as leadership. Machiavelli's greatest insight wasn't about conquering others. It was about refusing to be conquered. About maintaining your sovereignty in a world designed to strip it away. About choosing wisdom over pity, strategy over sentiment, and self-preservation over self-destruction. That knowledge is your birthright. Don't let them take it from you, and don't let them convince you that your personal healing is separate from the liberation of humanity itself. The revolution starts in your relationships. The freedom begins with your refusal to call abuse as love. The new world is built, one healthy boundary at a time. That's the truth they've been hiding for 500 years. Now you know it too.